going to help you, you know? So interesting stuff though. Sad, but interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if in the next 4 years they make marijuana federally legal and then completely corrupt the industry
I think
immediately.
it's our, I think it's already happening. I will say one of the things that, and again, I am by no means a massive smoker, and I'm not saying this as a caveat for anybody's benefit, just acknowledging the fact that like there's levels to this, just like there's levels to everything. Like I grew some weed outside for the first time in my life. And that felt made me feel so empowered in my own ability to do so versus having to rely on a source, especially for something that's a plant. It was pretty, I don't want to use the word transformative, but like it's pretty interesting to be able to do that. And then to think about how much money you actually pay at a dispensary. And I'm
Mm.
not above going to buy some weed, but like, why if I can do it myself? And, I think like that, that vein of the narrative is interesting, um, that you hear about from those hippie dudes because they wanted independence. A lot of them had PTSD too from Vietnam and shit. So
Cannabis is pretty easy to grow if you've got some sun. And it,
mhm.
for the difficulty that is involved, it gives you a large amount of benefits.
Mhm. Yeah, and but it's also interesting, like the nuances of yielding something that is smokable and does the trick too. Like again, there's methods, there's techniques,
There's
there's
levels.
there's levels. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
At the same time, anybody can do it and anybody could help themselves quite a bit.
Hmm.
And I think that that is one of the criminal aspects of making it criminal,
Mm.
one of the major ones, because it is medicinal for probably more than half of the people who use it.
Hmm.
And I don't mean medicinal like treating a symptom based disease that resolves. I see it as medicinal for like treating the struggle that is life. Like there are so many problems and pitfalls that happen with life. For instance, drug addiction. And
Hmm.
so many people could wean themselves off of drug addiction by essentially calming themselves down in a very anti-inflammatory way, in a rest promoting way, versus one that's exhaustive. Keep
I also
themselves out of
think that
trouble.
there's something to be said too. And I mean, look, I am by no means a aficionado on psychedelics, but there is something to be said about those scary moments too. Now, look, obviously, people have psychoses that are linked to cannabis use, right? So, like, if you have that kind of a problem, this it's a much bigger thing than you getting really scared or freaked out or reaching that state of kind of deep introspective thought. But like as a tool for that too, this the quote unquote bad trip is always a like the cannabis trip is always a matter of perspective. Like you can dance with the devil, like, and really come out of it with some interesting insights.
It's kind of mentally
um
therapeutic a lot of times.
I think so. I think for two reasons. Like, it augments things like intimacy, things like food, things like looking at the beach. It
And your inner
augments that
voice,
stuff. Yeah.
which is the paranoid part that a lot of people, because the inner voice isn't always right. A lot of times the
Mhm.
inner voice is doubt or fear, but it gives you access to that inner voice that when used correctly, it can be good to have, a second opinion
Mhm.
to your daily life. Um, but
What do you think about
other
that inner
people,
voice?
well, I think that that inner voice you can get overly caught up with too.
Mhm.
Like I think there's a line between it being helpful and a line between, for instance, like just getting using cannabis like all the time and just going so deep that you're just going back and forth internally. um just
Right.
kind of spinning your wheels, right? But
Yeah, it's interesting because you could achieve that. You could get so used to the craving of the state without taking a moment to appreciate the state itself, just to, like, to get there. Because once you're there, it doesn't really change your situation, right? But it should augment your daily life. I think sometimes people like chase the high, in order to level out, too, which is, I don't know, interesting to me because I'm not like that.
I think that second opinion can sometimes level out a day.
Hmm. Yeah.
My my regular mind will sometimes hear what somebody says as more negative than it actually was.
Hmm.
And sometimes using cannabis and then getting that second opinion will give me access to the other person's point of view, which for whatever reason, like my my mainstream mind just had a block to. It just wasn't
Hmm.
trying to see. And it can prevent me from uh, like retaliating, I guess you could say.
What do you mean? Sorry, I don't like retaliating against what, like following that
In a
negative self-talk or.
Yeah, yeah, like in
Hmm.
an energetic way, like becoming mad at somebody, or
Hmm.
uh not wanting to interact with somebody, when really the reality is it was like my misconception in the first place. It wasn't a real thing. And
Hmm.
I know that regular Patrick, for better or worse, quite often has a hard time knowing what's the real thing day to day, with a
Hmm.
lot of what I do, whether it's
And you mean real
interactions
thing
like that.
like. Hmm.
Yeah, just like interpretations, doing
Hmm.
doing things with investments
Right.
is another place where,
A lot
gosh,
of that has to be gut feel, right?
a
Well, I mean,
lot of
like,
gut
obviously it's
feel.
predicated, yeah.
but
And then
but
that the what's it called, the imposter syndrome and
the
gut feel
imposter
go hand in
syndrome
hand.
and the reality that sometimes you forget something that's really big, like
Hmm.
you forget a factor that is a really big deal in how a situation's going to play out. And if you forget that, your gut, would have thought the opposite had that
Hmm.
been in mind. And it's kind of like a stop, like a check, like, okay, do we actually have our ducks in a row here, or
You're
are we
talking about
leaving something big out?
psychology on so many different levels. You're talking about like self, like the psychology of the self, the psychology of the market, which is the aggregate of like a multitude of human beings. But ultimately, it boils down to, like, that. If you could distill it, it's that gut versus, it's the id versus the ego versus the super ego in constant kind of discourse. I think when I think about like what you say about like how you as Patrick think about things, and then you bring up trading, which is the market responding to how millions of people think about things. It's just
Right,
interesting
all
how
the news.
interconnected it is. Yeah.
Yes, and it's something that you can't predict the future on. So all you're trying to do is remove as much interference as possible, and then make decisions on a regular basis, so that over time, sorry, over time, those kind of decisions play out statistically well, unless you don't make decisions well, and then it'll play out statistically poorly. But yeah, you're just trying
How
to
is it that.
get down to
Yeah.
the essence of what you actually like, what your gut really is. You just want your gut to be being fed the right stuff. That's why like martial arts is really helpful in those kind of scenarios, because it allows you to have calibrated your stress response system,
Hmm.
so that you deal with different factors objectively. So you've got practice at doing that
Yeah,
rather
because
than,
your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system are a little bit more in control, because the
Mhm.
fear of combat, of conflict, is mitigated to a certain degree by putting yourself in that situation over and over again to where you feel comfortable in it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And to stay in it, you have to figure out the problem solving part of the game. And for the most part, do some problem solving each time that you train. And
Hmm.
so that's just training for something like investing
Hmm.
for me. Yeah, it calibrates things. It's helpful.
What is a big influence for you? I mean, apart from martial arts and in your decision making.
Having been a small business owner,
Hmm.
you can probably relate to that. I understand how many nuts and bolts go into the presentation of a product. That it's
Hmm.
not that it's not just, it's not just a neck crack. It's not just a spa treatment. It's not just a breakfast. There's employees and maintenance and real estate and advertising and uniforms and branding and all of those pieces that go into it. And I think that helps me come from a more accurate lens than somebody who's just looking at whatever the product is on the surface,
Hmm.
in terms of looking at a place to throw money at.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a valid point that I think a lot of people don't realize, a, what it takes to really succeed at running a business. And I don't, full transparency, I don't count myself as an expert in that. I have
But you kind of grew
a
up with it.
considerable, yeah, I mean, I have considerable experience. I'm more of an expert in what not to do, and seeing how that is. But on the other side of the coin, working in advertising, you see, going back again to psychology, the messaging, the imagery, the things that are becoming the stimulus and the impetus to make somebody make a decision that ultimately leads to a conversion. You know, you can Monday morning quarterback, after the fact of like whether or not the company is doing it for nefarious means or for whatever. But biologically speaking, if there's such a thing about a business as an, let's say, an entity, right? If it was a biological organism, its whole existence is predicated on survival, right? So like this idea that advertising or that a business is altruistic, I think is nonsense. You can be out, you can have aspects that are altruistic, but you do need to have the carnivorous aspects of it, right? Like,
Yeah, it's
you know,
it's influence, right?
mm-hmm,
And influence is a superpower, but it's
mm-hmm,
also something that's eternal.
yeah,
It's always been important. And they're just different mechanisms to gain influence, but that's what makes a product important and viable, right? It
mm-hmm,
either influences an industry or influences a generation.
mm-hmm. Or and it provides some sort of a utility. I mean, actually, let me rephrase that. There are one can argue that the Snuggie doesn't really offer that much utility. I'm only using it as like something, or like Spanx, right? Like there's something that you would never think many people would ever want, but then it becomes this multi-million dollar thing because you realize that
It made sense.
utility is, it made sense, even if it's ridiculous, even if the marketing is ridiculous, or and like whatever. Like the woman who started Spanx, I was reading an article about her, just super smart, man, like super smart, diligent, and kind of learned how to scale. I think that's the other thing, like just like you scale up in belts and jujitsu, you scale up in business too. And once you reach your black belt level in business, you got to go for the coral belt, and then after that, you just continue. Like there's no, like being stagnant, like is not a great way to succeed. My brother-in-law always jokes. He always says the same thing. He says either you become acquired, or you acquire. You know what I mean? Like,
Kill or be killed.
yeah, yeah, or you fade out. Yeah,
It's true.
it's there's a lot of parallels to everything. I think that doesn't mean that you're not subject to your human nature, right? Like that's the big X factor is instinct and kind of animalistic instinct.
Yeah, well,
I
like
think that's a big.
that's a huge part of it. Uh,
Mm-hmm,
a lot of people who try to, especially trading more than investing, because you can kind of like, you know how most of the investing books you read that are philosophies or overviews where they present like a way to probably invest. They're usually pretty similar. Like have some bonds, have some international stock market, have some U.S. stock market.
mm-hmm,
Like it's because it's a good idea.
mm-hmm,
Trading is more nuanced because you're betting on moments and you're betting on failure and success.
mm-hmm,
Um, and in investing, you don't usually bet on failure. You try to avoid it.
mm-hmm,
And a lot of people who want to be good at trading because it's a great mathematical vehicle for making more money more quickly, it's efficient, can't get over the fact that they're not always right. And so they never stop trading off of their opinion. Instead of incorporating like exactly how all of their trades play out and looking at
mm-hmm,
why they lose. And a huge part of trading is accepting what the public sentiment is.
mm-hmm,
So, like, for instance, just because you don't like Tesla doesn't mean that the value doesn't keep going up and up and up and they don't keep getting more and more orders for the cars.
mm-hmm.
And that should be pretty straightforward that you need to go with the up and up and up on that one, or
Right.
you just keep losing money. In fact, the Tesla shorts lost a historic amount of money betting against Tesla over the last several years. No one's ever lost more
Mm-hmm,
money because Tesla's gone up so rapidly that
mm-hmm.
those derivatives they exponentially increase in gains and losses as
Right.
things move. Um, and so, yeah, kind of learning the art of self-assessment so that you can then assess what's going on in the world around you, so you can listen to what your gut really is trying to tell you about the real information, right? Like you've got to, again, it goes back to the feeding your gut thing, but you've got to feed your gut the right thoughts, the right,
Mm-hmm,
the right philosophies, the right mental disciplines. And you need to be teaching your gut that you want to know what really is, like what is the truth, just not
mm-hmm,
what do I think initially, but okay, what do I think? And now the gut wants to know, what does the public think? What's happening? You know,
mm-hmm.
how is the actual reaction going down? And when I think this, what usually happens? Is my opinion am I a contrarian? Do I tend to think of the opposite of what's really going to happen? Then you can play with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you never understand that you're actually a contrarian, then you just bet wrong a lot. I'm a contrarian,
Mm-hmm.
like statistically speaking. Like when I make opinions or bets about what should happen with the world, with certain events, they typically tend to do like the opposite, at least initially.
Mm-hmm.
And so my gut reacts to that at this point. And it becomes a lot easier to be like, oh, okay, this is what I would like to see, but this isn't what the public does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you so you talked about like training your gut. I've I've always had a hard time. So culturally speaking, right? Greeks tend to be very loud people, very opinionated people, very at least Greek Americans, a lot of them successful business people. But one thing has always struck me, and that is just with the certainty that, especially, I would say some of the men that I've come in contact with who are part of that community, and I'm focusing in on this because I've done a lot of business with Greek and Greek American business. owners, but they have a tendency to speak with such absolute certainty about things that they have no frame of reference about. And that could be just a generational thing. But I always find it to be detrimental to come with the opinion that you know everything. And I really try, like, being a know-it-all is not, and it doesn't matter if you're right 95% of the time. You're not allowing your brain to um, train itself for the possibility that you're wrong, right? And I think that that's something that is um, like hedging, right? That's like, there's percentages to being right and percentages to being wrong. And what
Right.
you talk
Not
about
being
when you're
greedy.
saying, yeah, and you're saying like you're a contrarian and you tend to be wrong, like you have the wherewithal to at least, well, or let's say tend to be wrong, where that like your ideas initially sometimes aren't like what you expect, but you pivot, right? So that's like a big business word, obviously. But testing is a super important part of what I do as a profession. And I think it's a super important part of what people need to do in their everyday life, is to test hypotheses, to test themselves, to test, in a way that's not only like, okay, I'm going to test myself by, let's say, like running a marathon, but, you know, if you treat it much more as like an actual experiment, right, with quantifiable results, and test your hypotheses about, let's say, your decision making, like I was right 3 out of 5 times about the specific thing, what can I learn about it?
Hmm.
You arm yourself with a lot more knowledge that is actionable,
It's
you
so
know.
interesting. You say that's literally how you can learn to trade a stock,
Mm,
like options on a stock. Is
mhm,
you just you whittle it down to just a stock, and
mhm,
then make it basic math.
mhm,
You know, instead of all of the stocks in the stock, you're just like, all right, I'm just okay. What happened? How are my decisions playing out with this one stock? Let me just see what happens with this stock. Keep it extremely
mhm.
simple.
But the one thing I will say though, that like a test in and of itself is nothing without a plan though, right? So like
Right.
I think that's the one hard thing. And I'll speak personally, like from a professional standpoint, I understand the value of testing with like a testing plan, and then being able to read the results and then subsequently be able to make educated decisions and change, let's say, a product design or interface, whatever, uh, with that. But like when it comes to personal stuff, we don't do that, right? We don't iterate on ourselves because it takes a lot of work, like. And I like to draw the connections between a process that tends to be completely objective and then a being that tends to be very subjective, and seeing where those two net out. Like jujitsu is a great place to do a lot of testing.
Mhm.
It's a great place to test technique, to test theory, to test physicality, mental fortitude, to test your ego, because a lot of the times people think that they are, well, maybe just me initially, like before I started, one of the reasons why I got hooked on it was because I thought that I knew how to fight, and I discovered that I didn't know shit. And like, I was like, okay, that's, you know, like that's the truth.
It's
And
terrible. Yeah.
I had to face it,
I
right?
gotta
You have to
learn.
face it.
Damn it.
Yeah.
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 What have I
You
been
know,
doing?
right. Well, I'll tell you what I was doing, and what I think a lot of people do is posturing. Like, yeah, I mean, I played rugby, I knew how to dole out some sort of physical whatever, but like that's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as martial arts. It's not the same thing as, it's just different. It's different. Um
How did you guys decide on your menus for your restaurants?
this is a great question. We didn't. We decided on, we had people in the past make recommendations, but we never iterated on it. We never changed. We would add stuff and people were like, yo, that's really good. And then we'd be like, okay, people like it. And then we keep it there and keep it there and keep it there. When what we should have done is every year or every 3 or 4 months be like, okay, this thing is only selling 3 units. You can't keep it for like Bob, who loves it and is a regular. Yes, you should consider him, obviously, because regulars in the diner industry. Look, and also like we were operating a diner. Diners are the MO of a diner is you have an encyclopedia when you show up. It
Is it
is
is it gone?
which
All?
the restaurants or
Yes.
no, they're still there. I'm not involved anymore.
Are
I
they
don't really know.
closed?
Yeah, they're closed right now. Oh, and well, actually, one might be doing delivery, but dude, I feel so bad for so many people. This situation has been. I mean, I grew up above a restaurant. I grew up in a restaurant, and then I worked in a restaurant that was owned by my family for most of my life. And then
Restaurant was
I
straight out of a mafia movie.
yeah, yeah.
Some
But
of the warmest nights I had in Chicago were in the winter, pulling up to your restaurant and coming in and having a warm meal and a bottle of wine and watching the people of the neighborhood, um, Old Town,
mhm, yeah,
watching the people of Old Town come in and get food for their families. And
it's a special thing. It's a special thing, and there's places all over the world that are like these cornerstone kind of like of communities,
I'd only
and
seen them
they,
in movies, not on the level of, because the food quality was also special. Like it
yeah,
was it
it
was
was really good.
high quality Greek and American
Mhm.
diner food, I guess you'd call it. But the things that any American family would have grown up cooking, like their grandmother and mother would have been cooking.
Mhm. Look, food is it's an intrinsic part to our way that we commune with each other. I mean, we can say that it's also a very unhealthy way in the way that we interact too with ourselves, whatever. But a diner is such a it's a cold weather thing. It's a New York, New England, Midwest. I know that they exist on the West Coast. They're different.
They're different.
Um, they're different, which is okay. But like, it's a thing that it's disappearing too. It's not a sustainable business model anymore. I mean, apart from COVID, having a menu that size and then like being able to make it affordable too. It's just not. It's not a good business model anymore. So, but
Nostalgia.
you learned a lot. Yeah, nostalgia. I wonder. I really wonder what the landscape is going to be like. I think if you can survive, however much longer this is going to be, the amount of money as a mom and pop place that you can generate when things kind of start coming back online is going to be astronomical. But the interim period is the real challenge. It's the real challenge.
It's all very tragic.
Hmm.
And hopefully in a few years we're not really saying that. Like I don't want to use language that's too extreme,
Hmm.
because I don't know the future, and maybe
Right.
the right people pull out at the right time, or pull in, however it
Hmm.
needs to shake out.
Yeah.
But
I
it
think the
yeah.
challenge with the food industry specifically, right, is you're in close proximity with people touching your food, with your necessity of not wearing a mask at the moment. But I think in California, with the weather being what it is, and with us knowing that transmission is, I don't know, I'd hazard to say less outdoors versus being in like a cramped little diner in Chicago during the winter where it's freezing outside. I mean, I think if you're in a warmer area, you should be allowed to at least have your outdoor dining open, and not be completely shut down.
Yeah, it's really tragic what's happened in California. There it's everything's been so extreme.
Hmm.
But I'm still thankful that at least I'm getting sunny days and that kind of thing. Like
Hmm.
I'm still able to get outside, and but they've shut down the world.
Hmm.
It's really
Yeah,
too bad.
it is too bad. It's I don't know. I don't know what the correct response is. I mean, I feel like the correct response is protect people.
What are they doing in
I
Greece?
Well, in Greece, they're so locked down that you need like a text message proof and a piece of paper to even go to the supermarket.
Geez, I don't want to move like that.
Yeah, but people still are going out and like swimming and like walking and stuff and able to be outside. It's just that you're kind of confined to your neighborhood. If you're in the rural areas, it's a lot more open. You know, like right now, the olive season is in full swing, and as a major commodity, and of course, like you're working in small crews and you're outside all the time. Like you, again, you have a little bit more of a leeway when you're working that kind of job versus being in a city. The issue with Greece is, of course, that their medical system is not great. So, and it has a very large elderly population. So, you the risks are severe, especially coming out of a economic crisis. So, but the Greeks are they're very malleable, unlike I think our American friends here. You know, we have people laying down in WalMarts because someone's asking them to wear a mask. While people in other countries are just accepting the fact that they're being told to stay inside, and they
Right.
do.
And they do. And
Yeah.
somewhere in that gray area is what it is to be American.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I just don't know where it is.
I don't think anybody does, man. I think that's the issue with an unseen enemy, right? I mean, if you want to make comparisons to September 11th and COVID, the unity that a known enemy um, instills in people, or a known, I don't want to use the word enemy, but let's say a known opponent, right, is so motivating. And because people can't see it unless it happens to them now, they all are focusing on their inability to do the things that they were used to doing until they get sick or until someone they know gets sick. And then they have a moment to pause. So yeah, it's different for sure.
Pause. Are you using a Mac or a Windows computer?
Mac.
Have you looked into these new M1 computers?
I had looked at the mini Mac when I bought my iPad Pro a few years ago. I looked at one, and for the cost and what it offered, I was like, this shit makes a lot of sense because it is what like 5 inches by 5 inches maybe, and it sits in the corner, and all you really need is to plug it into all you need is a webcam. Like, I mean, you can get all the things to make it a fully functional thing, but it is, I think, for the processing power and for all the add-ons that you can then change. Yeah, dude, I think it's great.
So have you seen these new M1 chips?
No, I haven't, but I know that they're pretty powerful.
Okay. So they've got them right now in the MacBook Pros, the
Hmm.
MacBook Airs, and the Mac Mini. The
Hmm.
MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini have 8 core M1
Hmm.
processors, and the MacBook Air has no fan in it. It's a
Hmm.
fanless design, and it has one of the cores disabled. So it has 7 working cores, and
Hmm.
that's so that it doesn't run. It can run like at the same speed, but with less heat.
Got
So
it.
it's slightly slower though.
Hmm.
So um, the the performance, like the real world performance on these things, like with just 8 gigabytes of RAM,
Hmm.
is faster than like a 64 gigabyte, like 10 core, whatever it is, Intel
Hmm.
Windows computer, and faster than the fastest MacBook Pros from before
Hmm.
at the entry level. The fan has yet to turn on this Mac Mini.
And you're just pushing it to the limit right now with all your plugins and everything working.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
And with that move, it not only, to me, it's bigger than just them making their supply chain more efficient
Hmm.
and cutting costs a little. They have revolutionized home and business computing processor performance. and
Hmm.
power consumption. And goodness gracious,
You all right? Or just
COVID. Kidding. And because it's an integrated graphics chip
Mhm.
into this thing, they have put a serious dent in AMD, NVIDIA, and
Mhm.
Intel's uh, games and potential markets.
Mhm.
And depending on how quickly other companies are able to catch up, because they're kind of like Tesla all of a sudden, they've beaten
Mhm.
this other industry at its own game. I see that company potentially being worth like 75% more than they are now, because not only could they become a supplier of even more computers to end users, um, and have repeat customers from all of their clients once they get the full line of M computers out. But if they start selling to Windows manufacturers,
Mhm.
it'll be a massive thing.
Well, the other thing that they do from a design standpoint, right, is what I find so it's interesting. The only place I don't do Mac is on my phone, or Apple is on my phone, which is an interesting kind of idiosyncrasy, and I realize it. But my artwork, like the new MacBook Pro is, so they have done such a great job, first of all, with their accessibility of their operating system, right? So even if you are sight impaired, or if you have a special needs, they have been pioneers in kind of considering how you can utilize their technology with any sort of kind of challenges that you might have, or even with the way that it speaks to other pieces of technology, right? I mean, we talked about AirDrop, I think, one of the phone calls that we had. But their rules behind the design, the way that they are constantly updating their design system in the iOS, the way that they are always pushing the envelope with certain kind of new avenues. I mean, they're the first ones to make the iPhone. So, I mean, that was a revolutionary device. And I know a lot of other people have caught up, and one might argue there's better phones, but like for tablets, I mean, the ability that my first gen MacBook Pro, or my first gen iPad Pro can do, still the amount of artwork I can do, the things that I can do on it, the way that I can use it as a second monitor now that they updated the OS of Catalina. Like now I can plug in my iPad and make it a second monitor. Like that, all these kind of small things that they do to kind of constantly push the envelope, I think, is one of the reasons why they stay ahead, at least from like an ideation standpoint.
They make your
I
brain
think.
flow more efficient.
Mhm.
There are fewer options, but the options all make more sense.
They do. They really kind of thought about their UX. From gaming, and again, I don't game on a computer, really game that
You
much,
got
but
to have a
like,
PC.
yeah, that's what everyone says. So I don't know how Linux stacks up with like, Windows uh, for that ability to be able to process and things like that. I have no idea, but everyone swears by PCs, so that's all I know.
Gaming PCs are one of the best values out there.
Oh, for sure. I think way more of a value than PlayStation or Xbox, but I'll be honest with you that I think that the difference is like just how you become nerdy. You can become nerdy about anything. Like if you are into PCs and their performance and everything, I think that's like the barrier of entry for someone who just wants to sit down, turn on and play a game or watch a movie, and there's value to that too. But I think like for the hardcore PC like aficionados, you get into like building your own tower, your screen resolution, your chips. But you're right. I think you can constantly upgrade it without having to like wait for the next best thing, which I think is. Have you been following what's been going on with PS5 and the
Cyberpunk.
Grinch, well, not just that, but like the Grinch bots, and how they are like there's a whole black market for them right now because the demand is so high. It's pretty interesting.
No. What are the Grinch bots?
So it's interesting because I had pre-ordered one, and then I thought to myself, do I really want to pay $500 right now, or do I want to, like, I'm an adult, I can wait. And then I catch myself, full transparency, being like, I wish I'd gotten the new shiny thing. And then I have to have this like inner debate with myself about like whether or not it's worth it. All that aside, people have basically been utilizing bots to buy up inventory, and then they turn around, they sell it for 100% markup on like eBay and things like that because there is a shortage. So they used bots to basically buy bulk, and the return on their investment has been pretty substantial because, especially before Christmas, the demand went through the roof because the supply wasn't there.
The
And
internet is
so
undefeated.
yeah, so the I don't know, somebody started calling them Grinch bots because it's like the Grinch that stole Christmas, because little Johnny's not going to get his PS5, which
Johnny could get
honestly,
a
dude,
iller
it's fine.
PC for $750.
Right, right. And also, dude, like I know right now that the people who have the means, really, this has been a hard year for everybody. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to comfort, we want to go to like the special, we want to do that. There's something to be said about abstaining. There's something to be said about continuing to save during this time if you can, because coming out of it, on the other end of it, we because you don't know how long this is going to continue either. So I I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in like really calculating what it is that you want to spend your money on, because it makes you feel better. Because I see a lot of things on social media about like allowing yourself to have bad days right now. That's great. Allowing yourself to do this, allowing yourself to do that. A part of me agrees with that. A part of me is also like, maybe now's the opportunity for you to also step the fuck up,
Get your shit
and
together.
like, you know, maybe that discomfort that you're feeling is a good thing, because then it pushes you to that next thing. Um, it is a double-edged sword. I have definitely gotten burnt out from working and trying to just knock it out of the park every day when I wake up, because I can wear shorts at work and I don't have to commute. And I know that like there are times in the day where I can walk into the front room and watch some Netflix with my girlfriend. So there is that bonus to it. But like, I don't know. I think there needs to be some sort of a gain coming out of this. I think there is going to be, at least communally, between the way we communicate. I dropped my father off at the airport, and I realized it was the first time I'd hugged him in like 6 months. Just fucking wild to
It's
think
creepy.
about.
Yeah.
It is.
My
It is.
longest conversations tend to be over the phone or over video
Mhm.
this year.
Yep. Yep.
Other than with my partner.
Hmm.
But
Right.
yeah, otherwise it's so distant. I might as we the other day it was really foggy out, dark, and we both were kind of like, it feels like we're almost like on a spaceship or something like that, just floating along, waiting to
We
see the
kind of
next
are
waiting to see the
waiting to
next
see the
people.
aliens. Waiting to
Yeah.
see the fucking aliens whenever they come down. What do you know what we haven't really talked about that. What are your opinions on that Israeli guy saying that there's like a federation of them, and that, I mean, listen, me, I always dip my big toe in the conspiracy well when it comes to aliens specifically, not like other stuff. Um, I just think it's really interesting that like the New York Times is reporting on fucking UFOs now. Like it's like it's surreal, you know?
I wonder if we can handle the truth. And I'm not in any rush to get it, but I'm also not afraid to keep getting information.
I guess for me, I just always took the mathematical, when you think about how much information we've learned even in the last 5 years about how many habitable planets there are that are habitable to us, right? As a carbon life form that evolved under these parameters on this rock that's floating through the void. It's just not a question of if, it's a question of when.
When and where.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's enough, like, I was thinking earlier in the conversation how people last year, so many people just got in their car and drove for like an hour and a half each way to go
Mm-hmm.
sit somewhere else and work hard for the whole day. And then they get back in their car and sit more for an hour and a half. And that doesn't make any
Hmm.
sense really, right?
Mm-mm. It
But
makes
that's where
sense.
we were at.
Yeah.
And then
And now,
and throughout life, we have behaved in a way, and the world has behaved around us in a way such that we have depended on creation stories to move us through time, to give us meaning to all of this. And like growing up, I studied the Christian creation story pretty regularly, and it is
mhm,
just as psychedelic slash um, extraterrestrial as any of these discussions of an extra mineral that is on some other planet that allows fusion propulsion of
mhm,
rocketry. I mean
mhm,
that I can have that kind of conversation, right? Like that.
mhm,
I'm not even talking about something that sounds all that unbelievable at that point, and
mhm.
that's that's what the discussion of aliens is like right now. So I don't find it that far fetched when we have bigger stories already that people have no problem believing, and we have no problem accepting people for believing. You know,
Sorry, I muted myself because of the fire trucks. I have a. I wonder. We've talked about metaphysical things. There are so many things that we have yet to understand about our own existence, right? In our own natural world that surrounds us. And I wonder what I hope there are people who invest the same kind of brain power or hope or faith in or interest in those things as well. Like we have insane neural networks of mycelium that make trees communicate, and it's proven, right? We have you know animals that can change their skin texture and color at will with DNA that is completely foreign to other animals, like cephalopods are like that. We have these things, and not only that, like you and I've talked about intention manifesting itself as energy, and that energy kind of carrying through and vibrating across your timeline and the individuals that you meet. Like,
resonance.
yeah, and that's something that used to be woo woo, but then if you think about it from, let's say, like a physics perspective, and you think about atoms and how they move, I mean, heat is vibration. Like there are all these things that I think are, I just take not for granted, but that I've just said, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, why wouldn't I be able to exert my kind of energy onto someone else? Like, dude, you've been in dangerous situations. When someone's up to no good, like that animal instinct, that like, tingling in the back of your neck. There is something to that is both physical and I would say metaphysical, in the sense that maybe you're honing into something primal of like when a tiger was staring at you through the grass. Like, these things are, we just take them for granted. Like,
Oh
you
yeah,
talk
you
about
definitely
gut.
take things for granted.
Yeah, you talk about gut, that's what that is. I mean, I think you can train these things, breath, guts, I don't know, sleep, thought, dream, all those things. I think that they play a role,
And
and
you
we
can
get numb to that.
yeah, exactly. You can get numb. You can alienate yourself
Hmm.
from your ability to exert energy over
Hmm.
people, places, and things. That's another thing the martial arts does. You're not dealing with negative energy, which is for the most part, which is good, but
Hmm.
you're exchanging energy with somebody, and you're learning that like you're reinforcing that it's something that you're dealing with all day. This is just a lot
Hmm.
more gravity, a lot more inertia
Hmm.
than you're getting hit with most of the day, but it's there.
Right.
And you're learning that you can kind of exert the right counters the right directions to affect that energy in a way that it works out better for you. And
When you feel it, when a white belt will get like, or not even a white belt because there's some world class white belts, but like, a new person who's never done jujitsu, the amount of strength needed for them to feel grounded and confident because they have absolutely no fucking clue what they're doing. I mean, we've
they
all
have
been through
no
that.
control
Everybody,
over that
yeah,
energy.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And
It's
therein
interesting to
lies
feel that.
that you can affect other things.
Mhm.
Hard to say what, but you can certainly affect other things with the way you apply your energy.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that a big part of understanding that, I think, involves being still
Mm.
and not having stimulus all the time. And you talked about driving somewhere in order to work to then drive back. We are being bombarded by stimulus right now, even especially in this way that we're communicating, right? Because we're staring at a screen. Yeah, I can see your face, I can see your reactions, but it is one step removed. And
There's all
I
these, yeah,
wonder,
there's all this stuff in between.
yeah, I wonder what that is going to do. Like, I wonder, are we facing a are we facing a crisis in our evolution right now where we cannot deal with the lack of stimulus?
I
I
have a
mean,
hard time.
yeah,
I go to sleep to listening to podcasts or books.
hmm, me too. Yeah,
I
me
don't,
too.
I get it, if I lay down and don't have one going, then I start having the, the thoughts about the uncertainty of the times
Hmm,
just do nothing productive for me.
hmm, hmm. Same. I was up until 3 a.m. last night because I couldn't sleep because I was just thinking about all these things that have transpired this past year. But maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe it's like a shedding. I mean, obviously, I'm a big proponent of therapy, and I know that that's like one of those things that you can do that. But self-soothing, like we have a pacifier. That's what our phones are. I mean, it's proven, right? The dopamine burst and everything. It's a pacifier.
You know,
I'm not. I'm not.
I'm very
I'm
intrigued
just.
about that because
Mhm.
without that pacifier, this would have been a more difficult year for me.
100%. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not casting necessarily aspersions on it. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I play D&D, which has been my way to socialize. And although I'm staring at a screen, I kind of view it as like I am not consuming other content that was created. I feel like I'm doing like a communal storytelling thing, whatever my interests are in that's secondary. But like, I agree, without the ability to be able to pick up my phone, but again, then I playing devil's advocate, would if we were kind of what was going on with the Spanish flu, do you think things would have been transmitted as much? Do you think we would have had as much angst because people are staring at these things all day and making comparisons and whatever? Like, I know we've talked
More
about it.
people
You
died.
have a
We would
Yeah,
have had more people dying. Sorry, you were
100%.
saying.
Well, I know you have made a very salient point of saying that like you can control the stimulus that social media affects on you.
Yes.
But I think that comes because we grew up at a time where we existed before it.
Yeah, I don't think it's for everybody, but I think that the people
Mhm,
who want social media or want to use it as a tool for themselves need to go at it at a way that it works for them.
mhm.
Um, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think like, look, being able to see your family at least and have a conversation with them especially during this time of the holidays, while it's not ideal, it's better than not knowing if they're alive or, worrying about that. Um, Plus with our phones, like, dude, I set up my COVID tests through my phone. I mean, like, there's just so many, there are benefits. I do think that social networks are problematic. I believe that strongly. And I still not strongly enough to where I got off for a while. Now I'm back on. But like, um, I do think that if we were able to educate people on that aspect, maybe they could control themselves a little bit more. But it's hard. It's a loaded thing. But I agree with you. I think had we not had access to each other and to maybe the pacifier, it would be harder this time.
I grew up with AOL Instant Messenger, but
Hmm.
I didn't grow up at a time when you always had access to a computer.
Yep.
And
You had to get on the phone line and dial in, and someone was on the phone, so you had to wait. You didn't have that immediate access.
I moved around as a kid a bit, and I also um, went to different schools, and I went away for things. I spent a bit of time on my own
Mm,
ish, and I was lonely a lot. Whether it was a Friday night studying while other people were out, and I'd missed so many Friday nights that if I stopped studying, I wouldn't even really know who to call or
mm,
what where to go or whatever. And the ability to access customized media was kind of an answer to a void that like just organically developed in my life.
mm.
And other people don't have that void, and they probably do well to avoid just inserting media in there to keep them company.
Right.
But for me, for instance, like now I can get news whenever I want and trade with ease. And in the time that I've been trading, now I can even do it for like free. Like there's no fees
Hmm.
to the trades. And that sets me up to survive this sort of thing better. But it also is such a far cry from my understanding of what it took to create a product or a way of generating money when it was tied to, you need to open an office, develop a staff, create a marketing plan, create services offered, talk someone into care, give them an adjustment, make them
Hmm.
feel better, find
Hmm.
someone out, this long process that involved lots of overhead and lots of pressure versus this virtual world where depending on what you choose, it's all right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you would have more of a frame of reference for this, but I know that teledoc appointments are becoming. Look, I don't know for chiropractic, it's got to be difficult to do that, but I think like remote care is going to be a major thing that is going to make insurance companies a shit ton of money, because doctors can just stack appointments and just sit in front of a computer and do it instead of having to have an office. To your point, yeah, we are on a precipice, I think, of a sea change in the way that we do work. I think any major corporation that has real estate that they have offices in, why would they want to pay for that upkeep now? I mean, like, why? I mean, I
I
understand that
think
there's
it's going to
necessity.
create some rearrangement in the commercial markets.
It will. I also think there are certain industries where you need to be in person. I think an agency, especially a creative one, like brainstorming in person, being able to have client meetings. But see, maybe I'm just biased and don't even realize it. Like, part of having an office, let's say in a prestigious building, for example, is to wow a client. You know, there's a psychological aspect of like you're coming to see our agency and the look of it, and the way that Google's campus is, the way that Twitter's building. You know what I'm saying? Like these things are vehicles to convince people to do business with you. When it gets to this, I think this then is the this is more real in some ways, despite the fact that it's behind a digital curtain. Like I've spent the last year literally seeing into people's homes, seeing their kids, seeing their pets, having to acknowledge the fact that they've got to raise kids and the kids will come running and screaming by or say hello. We have a window into people's personal lives in a way that's I don't want to use the word voyeuristic, but like I think that there's some positive stuff rubbing off from it. You know, like you realize that okay, I don't need to put on a facade. Like the way that we interacted in an office doesn't necessarily need to be the way that we're doing. Like it's today a hard day because someone you know got sick and died. You tell your coworkers that, and then they're like, "Yo, dude, take a day off." Like that would never have happened a year ago. You know, I mean, so in that regard, I think there are some, I don't know, some powerful things happening.
When I was a teenager, I went to a couple of different schools, and being the new kid at smaller schools, they were very cliquey, and it was hard to get to know, especially girls, well. Um, yeah, it was hard to get to know a bunch of different girls well.
Mm-hmm.
And the existence of AOL Instant Messenger gave me an outlet to occasionally get to know like an extra person well who might act a certain way in a social setting, or might
Mm-hmm.
need to only talk to so and so in a social, whatever the pre-existing condition would be. um,
Mm-hmm.
and even though it wasn't as organic as just sitting next to someone, sometimes it was even more organic, because sometimes it made you braver to be
Mm-hmm.
a little more honest, or to maybe ask about something a little more personal. And
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to know people really well in my life more than once over text. And iMessage, I feel like, was an extension of that,
Mm-hmm.
that really revolutionized it. And now, obviously, that's evolved into Instagram. People talk
Mm-hmm.
via that messaging system, um, very efficiently, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
iMessage does it very securely, and the delivered thing, and the fact that someone could have it anywhere they were,
Mm-hmm.
the combination of those two moves, just, and then being able to send pictures, just really, um, I think, was an evolution in people's ability to communicate. And of course, now we see people over communicating
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
they can always
I mean,
emote and communicate.
well, this is the whole thing about neural network now, right? Like, you know, you brought up Cyberpunk. I'm playing it right now. Interesting the whole situation
Are you
is
playing
very
it on
interesting.
PC, or are you playing it on the
No, I'm
PS5?
playing it on PS4, the base one. So like I am one of
So
those
I heard
people
it's
that is in.
super bad on
Oh
that.
yeah, it is, but you know what? I mean, I'm still enjoying the story. What is really interesting is uh, see for me being a fan of like writing role playing game scenarios and seeing the technical kind of ability for the writing of it, but also like thinking about like it's showing you a version of this like 80s kind of interpretation of the future. But dude, everyone's plugging into everybody. There's like calls all the time. You can see into people's head. Like, I think that is a very
It's
realistic
realistic.
like future state that we could potentially find ourselves in, you know. I mean, absolutely, people are already breaking off. So like you had the social networks appear, and now because the narrative is that things like Twitter and YouTube and all these other things are censoring, you're seeing the fracturing into smaller cliques that use their own networks. I mean, everybody can set up a VPN now. I mean, we're moving in that direction. Like, if I want to have a secure conversation with you via text, I'll use Signal, right? If I am more conservative leaning and I don't want to be on Twitter because I feel like whatever, I'm going to go on to some other social network. Um, it's not for everybody, but like I mean, look, the what is it? You talk about AOL chat rooms were the first iteration of this. You know, a place where you could be safe on the internet, and then people started watching that, and so then you had to set up your VPNs, and then you know, like I mean, it's happening. Human beings organically want to find a way around control structures. And they organically want to push the envelope, I think, of communication and access too now that they have technology. So I don't know. Um,
It's a
I
wild
have
ride.
I have delusions of grandeur that I'm going to live on a farm and not have and just have internet and like not be part of all of this. But I don't know that that is how that's going to happen, considering that I work in tech. So
I might live on a farm and have a tricked out studio
yeah,
and
yeah,
utilize as much technology as I possibly can, including robots to help me water the plants.
yeah. I mean, yeah, get yourself a couple of drones, get
Mhm.
yourself a little robo helper. Yeah, I mean, I think we are living.
Make it a lot
Uh,
easier to have your own farmlet.
that's true. And we're on the precipice of sci-fi. I mean,
Right.
it's here already.
Minority
You
Report.
know, yeah, yeah, we're on the precipice of like real sci-fi. I
It's
mean,
exciting. A lot of people
it
are
is
terrified
exciting.
of it, but I just see it as here we like it's coming. It's like getting in a fight. Like when the fight has begun, it's like okay, you here you are. You can pretend it's not happening, but it's happening, buddy. And here we
And it's
are.
all about
We're COVIDing
opportunity,
right
right?
now.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's about opportunity too. If you can create opportunity for yourself, I mean, like the way that you work right now, I mean, I guess the way everybody's working right now is remote, but I'm saying like you have a lot more control over your workflow and your income than ever before because of the technology.
Right. I'm a
So
benefactor.
traditional modes of work are changing. This whole the whole dialogue about disruptors, right, in industries is just really interesting because it's just a rehashing of like Uber cracks me up because what does it do? It takes away the medallion from the taxi drivers. That's really all it does. Because anybody can become a taxi driver. You just have to pay for the medallion, and there's
Right.
certain systems in place. Uber said, no, everybody gets to be a taxi driver. You get to pay, you get paid whatever the fare is. We're going to surge price too when the demand's high. And then, you know, but now those people want to be independent contractors so that they can get insurance. So like it's always changing and you have to
Yes.
insert yourself into that at
Yes.
some point
Predict those
somehow.
cycles.
Yeah. I the only thing I think is really interesting. So going back to the cyberpunk thing, dude, look at this data breach, this Russian hacking thing. Like, I mean, it happened in the last election. It happens all the time. I mean, Snowden was looking at it. Like, I mean, it's there. It's
It's all
just
there.
now that it's all there, and it's been there since we had phone lines. I mean, they have you ever
It
seen
was
how they got?
easier back then. They just
Yeah,
tap in. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a
I know a thing or
documentary.
two about tap phones.
Oh yeah, that's right.
They could just do that to you.
They can, and
You're
you know
breathing.
what? That's right. You can. You'll hear little clicks on the line.
Tim, is
That's how they
that
got all the
you?
mobsters.
No.
Yeah. Now it's just much more sophisticated.
Right. Right. Now the computer's telling us if they're listening or not, and the computer's
Mhm.
listening for us. And
Yeah,
but you're right. It's all very cyclic,
yeah.
very ever present. Way back in the day, they probably had like little people just hiding up in rafters, just
Oh, for
spying.
sure. I mean, ninjas, dude. That's what
Right.
ninjas were
There
doing.
you go. Right. Yeah.
Ninjas were literally clandestine operatives that would spy. I mean, spying has been something that everybody's done since. I mean, you do that at the washing well because gossip is because information is power. Yeah. We went on a tangent, but still, it's it is interesting to see kind of where we're going to net out. I think finding a place where you can be outside most of the year is important, though. I think warmer or more manageable climate is important, but like it's 50 degrees in Chicago in the middle of December tomorrow, and that's crazy.
That's exciting.
Depends on who you ask. I'm concerned only that
It's
like
too warm.
yeah. Look, man, I think for this year, I'm glad that it's been warmer so I can be outside and walk and like not have severe snowstorms and, have to like walk through that just because I'm stuck in my house. So I'm thankful that we've had a mild winter, but, I wonder what the implications of all that's going to be for us because COVID is one challenge, right? But if the environment starts
Remember when we took a month off and the whole world started regenerating?
Mm-hmm.
And then we stopped taking that month off and it's
And
back
then,
to the
yeah, I
races.
went back. Yeah, I know. It's really interesting how homeostasis can be achieved very quickly. I was
Just by
surprised
letting
by that.
nature do its thing.
Yeah. One might argue that that's what COVID's doing. Cool.
Was watching the Delta and was was watching like all of the reeds and the aquarius vegetation,
Mhm.
just breathing, just respiring. And it was just fascinating to watch like the whole cycle of how it was just like using the different plants that were just floating along the delta to oxygenate stuff and clean, and then they could get
Mhm.
caught up at certain areas, and then birds would walk around and eat the flowers that had just fueled up from that, and then bop 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 bop. And it's just so much more intricate and just so much simpler at the same time than so much of the nonsense we do.
I think patterns are incredibly powerful. And I think that we, like, the true understanding of things comes from understanding patterns.
Mm.
And I think that those patterns are begin in the imperceptible, like quarks, and then resonate into how gravity operates and is affected by the spheres in our own solar system, you know. And I think that that's why, like, you know, this whole thing about this divine clockmaker, you know, is appealing to people, you know, people who are scientific but still maybe believe in faith. Is like, it really is, everything kind of fits into that gear of the other thing, and everything turns, and when things go out of whack, shit breaks. But then the machine, you know, it pivots, it recalibrates, and then it continues down another trajectory of gears. um and 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 look, we got out of the savannas and built cities because we observed patterns and improved on certain things. So
Exploitations.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, when you watch the cycles of plants grow, and you realize that seeds are intrinsic to that, and they need certain things, and then you start, like, animal husbandry has been happening. Like, terraforming was done by ancient peoples. They would burn forests in order to improve their chances of getting game. Like, we always exert on
Energy,
the, yeah,
control,
exactly, always.
vibrations, physics.
Physics. You sound like a Wu-Tang Clan song now.
heavy heavy resonance through the 36 chambers.
That's right. Dude, you know, it's so funny. I was thinking about the Wu-Tang, by the way. I'll show you. I have this, whatever. I got this poster that said, presidents are temporary, Wu-Tang is forever. It's like a big
Amen.
election poster. Um, and I was thinking about the RZA yesterday. It's funny how a nerd, like a true nerd, and I mean that in like the best sense of the word, someone who was into kung fu films, who didn't have a great like setup, was able, and then also took, like, think about how many disparate personalities exist in that group, and was allowed to, like, was able to combine them
Distinct.
into this really groundbreaking, uh,
To this
like,
day, never equaled.
no, unparalleled. I would say, for me, like, one of the more, I'm making a lot of connections right now, but, you know, with the passing of someone dear to me, I became introspective, and I had this weird tangential thought about, like, what is it that got me, like, to where I am today, both negative and positive, like cause and effect. And then for some reason I was thinking about the Wu-Tang Clan, and I was like, dude, it got me into martial arts. It did, because I was like watching kung fu flicks, got me into westerns, got me into Japanese cinema, which got me into Japanese culture, and like all these things got me into jujitsu. And it's very interesting to follow that pathway of interest. Um, and to get to where I am today. So the Wu-Tang Clan was very, very formative for me. Having no frame of reference as a Greek kid from Chicago to what the fuck they were talking
Well,
about from
that's, you
Shaolin.
know, the same thing happened with so many Jewish kids and Irish kids and
Hmm.
Russian kids
Yeah.
that just had no idea, but they got schooled. They
Hmm.
got a proper understanding of the
I
technique.
yeah. I also think that like I have the Tao of the Wu-Tang. I don't know if you ever read that book.
I believe I did.
Yeah. I think they did such a good job of really bringing like everybody into their very insular slang, like as if it they just did it from the get-go, and so people were like, what are they saying? And then you start understanding like there's so many more
The
metaphors, the way
world,
that they
yeah, there was a
yeah,
whole
yeah,
world.
it's a whole world. It's really neat. So I think yeah, I, I didn't think we'd end up talking about the Wu-Tang Clan, but I like they are formative for me. I always have been.
I don't know how their music will fit into the history. Like, we know how important they are, but I wonder if Wu Tang Forever will be an album that kids end up finding, like they find. Uh, I don't know what kids find now, like, but like I found Operation Ivy or Led
Oh
Zeppelin or
yeah.
something like that. I wonder if it'll just be something that isn't touched anymore and just is known as a foundation. But I feel like there's a period where the production became pretty much timeless because the early stuff did sound kind of primitive, but the production became timeless and everybody was really in their pocket.
Yeah.
And it's a whole education on lyricism and like hip hop, like rapping,
Hmm.
like that's serious music.
Hmm. I think as long as people smoke weed for the first time and listen to the White Album or 36 Chambers, I had two interesting experiences, one on cannabis and one not. I decided to watch live performances of famous music that I had become inundated with and put myself in the mind state of saying, okay, I'm going to watch Jimi Hendrix play like one of his first broadcasts, black and white, and imagine what it would be like to have never heard a sound like that before. And I did that with Hendrix. I also did that with Johann Sebastian Bach and the Brandenburg concertos. To think about sitting in a concert hall in Vienna and some dude comes out and plays what essentially is jazz. I mean, really, it's essentially jazz on a harpsichord at the speed that the harpsichord solo in the Brandenburg Concerto is, and being like where do you go from there? Or hearing Mozart for the first time, or even you can even go like, look, tonal resonance is like a major thing that we know impacts people's emotions. I mean, that's why there is mathematics behind music. I mean, it's always going to be there because we are just intrinsically tied to it. But yeah, so but I was going to say the other experience was like I had never listened to New York hardcore from the 80s, and I started listening to like Gorilla Biscuits. I started listening to all these dudes because I had listened to John Joseph Cro-Mag talk about how being vegan and straight edge tied into this incredibly aggressive musical style and like what PMA was all about. And it just is so interesting, but that's how my mind works. I like that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I think as long as you can get stoned and listen to an album start to finish. Um, if anybody ever watches this, my recommendation would be go down the list, go down, I don't know, Rolling Stones top 100 albums of all time, and actually listen to every single song in the order that they
Hmm.
put it out. And
In the order
it
that they put it
changes.
out.
Yeah, man. Like if you listen to
Well,
Led Zeppelin
it's like
2,
an hour a day for, you could do it in a year pretty
yeah.
easily. Every third day,
And,
listen to one album.
and there's going to be albums on there that you wouldn't even think to listen to, but it's we're so used to listening to chart toppers, single songs, next song. An album structurally is also part of that journey. right? Like if you listen to Queen's A Night at the Opera, it's called A Night at the Opera because it has a beginning act, a middle act, and then the final act. And
Right.
so people, they do that on purpose. And so like Sublime, I think is one of the most perfect albums. That and Fuji's The Score, two of the most perfect albums ever made, ever, in my opinion, especially The Score. I mean, you're talking about, I think they released 2 or 3 albums after that, but it won a Grammy, like start to finish. You can listen to every single song.
It takes you on a trip.
It does.
It
Yeah.
takes you to the hood in Long Beach. It takes you to New York,
Mm-hmm.
to into an immigrant neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I listen to so much jazz these days, and
Excellent.
when I first started listening to jazz years ago, I tried to figure out what songs were the good songs and listen
Mm-hmm.
to them. And that's a really steep learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
What I've found myself enjoying most about it these days is hearing the context within the music.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many songs have parts, like so many songs almost behave as albums because they'll be 10, 11 minutes long. And
Mm-hmm.
certain parts work so well because of other parts that
Mm-hmm.
show up there. And unless you just let the thing play, and if you're really not, if I'm really not digging something, I just skip to the next
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I just kind of let it play, and then the moments find me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that makes
And that's
sense.
why, you know what, oh, it does make sense. So my stepmom had a jazz club, right? And like that's where I learned the appreciation of watching it live. And when you listen to live performances, when the switch happens between solos, people clap. Middle song, it's like the only genre of music where it's acceptable to clap during
We were
the
talking about
song.
that actually, about going to the Green Mile over the weekend, and
Mm-hmm.
that I had taken Jenna to the Green Mile, um,
Mm-hmm.
when we were in Chicago, and
Mm-hmm.
how neat that was for her. But the courtesy and how that works, like there the
Mm-hmm.
applause in the middle, but also like you need to shut the fuck up while people are trying to play.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
You don't
Because
scream the whole
you're
time.
there to, yeah. And it depends. Like, you know, going there, my buddy was a bartender there. And there was this band that's now defunct who I would really recommend called Sabretooth. And they would play bebop like from the 50s, but it was like with a modern edge. And their whole thing was raucous, but they would always be an end of the night band, right? Because you knew when Sabretooth was playing, it was about like
The,
getting dirty with it. But
those
then when
last
some of like the,
martinis.
yeah, but some of these like older school kind of traditionalist jazz people, you know, would sit there and listen to the previous, you know, groups dead silent. And then at the bar, people would tell you to shut the fuck up because it's not about you. Like it's about you enjoying it. And you need to know like what night of week you're going to be there.
And that
But yeah,
goes
she
back
had
to what
this.
you were saying about the classical music for the first time in that time. Like, can you imagine how special hearing a jazz band during a prohibition night?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Insane.
Yeah,
In,
you wouldn't
or
want to
like
waste it.
listening
You
to
wouldn't want to
Robert
waste
Johnson
a
play.
moment of that. You would want to just,
Yeah.
you're not going to hear
You'd want to
something
take it
like
all
that
in.
again anytime soon. Not with those
No.
acoustic. Yeah, right.
Like there's a great PBS
So
live.
psychedelic.
It's incredibly psychedelic. Stevie Ray Vaughan played with Albert King. It's one of my favorite. You can see the entire performance. Stevie Ray idolized Albert, and Albert was older at that point, and you see the influences of the person who invented it and the person who was carrying it and then making it their own on stage at the same time. And you could see the masters of both their crafts, but with different tonality. Like music is just, I mean, it's been a major part of my life. You know, I play, I've grown up listening to it, and I'm a novice. I'm not really into the theory or whatever, but you have to understand what it does to people. Even electronic music, even shit that I don't like, it touches somebody. Like I went through that phase where I listened to Korn, you know, I was like 13, you know, and like it was all emo and shit and listened to that because it meant something to me then,
Mm-hmm.
was angsty, you know. So I think to your answer about will people be listening to Wu-Tang Clan or Bach or whatever, yeah, I think the good thing is that the accessibility it's music has become accessible, but I
It's in
just
my
think that
pocket.
the way that we've been listening to it has changed. I think the business of music has made it be about one or two or three songs instead of the entirety of the album. And I like my cousin has put out now two really exceptional psychedelic albums that he recorded completely in analog, and it sounds like they're recorded in the 60s. And I listened to them all the way through, and there's purpose and intention behind the entirety of the album. So I think as I like try to, I think it just like lead, like with anything, if you lead with intention when you're like cooking or cleaning or listening to music or reading a book, you get a little bit more out of it, or it changes at least, how you're interacting with it.
Lead with intention.